Thank you, Sister Lavina. It's a joy to be with you today. Franciscan Mission Service, at our heart, is a mission organization in the Franciscan tradition. We were founded some 34 years ago by Brother Anselm Moons. Brother Moons came from the Netherlands to the United States, initially envisioning that he would be forming friars for overseas mission. But he eventually came to the discernment that his call was actually to form the laity. And so Franciscan Mission Service was born. If I had to encapsulate the spirit of who we are in one sentence, I would say, inspired by the examples of St. Francis and St. Clare, Franciscan Mission Service shares and receives God's unconditional love across borders through a way of life that centers marginalized voices and focuses on living out the gospel encounter of intercultural encounters, radical inclusion, authentic humility, and transformative justice. So how do we do that? We have 6 distinct programs that allow us to strive towards this mission. One, of course, is the Overseas Lay Mission Program. Individuals serve for 2 or more years overseas, walking with local communities, embracing a Franciscan ministry of presence. And while they're doing that, they're teachers, working in orphanages, working in prisons, working in other social service organizations. Over the years, FMS lay missioners have served in some 20 countries throughout the globe. Currently, they are serving in Bolivia, in Jamaica, and along the US-Mexico border. We go at the invitation of local communities, particularly local sisters and friars from the Franciscan Charism. Our second program is our DC Service Corps Volunteer Program, specifically for young adults who wish to serve for 11 months in Washington, DC. We recognized that the need isn't just overseas, it's also a need for a ministry of presence and what Pope Francis would say is a culture of encounter right here in our own backyard of Washington, DC. The individuals who are serving receive a deep formation just as the overseas lay missioners do, and then they augment the capacity of local nonprofits, and we strive to develop them as leaders, as servant leaders in the Franciscan tradition. Our third program is brand new this year. It is our Franciscan Fellows Program. Those individuals have a heart for Franciscanism and a heart for mission. They might not have a reality of life that allows them to go overseas at this time. So they gather as a cohort in community once a month at our FMS Casa, our volunteer house and house of hospitality, for fellowship, a workshop on Franciscanism and mission, and a chance to be together. They'll join us for events throughout the year, such as going to transit service together, going to our commissioning mass together, and they just had their opening retreat last weekend. Our fourth program is we offer a handful of mission trips each year, traditionally geared towards university students, inviting them to come for a week immersion experience in Washington, D.C. It's a combination of direct service, prayer, and education, a learning and a being with, again, steeped in this ministry of presence. Our fifth piece is our social media ministry. We know that so many have a heart for mission and only a fraction can actually go on mission. So we share the stories of mission through regular blogs and other social media outreach. And then finally, here in Washington, D.C., the Volunteer House serves as a house of hospitality. Friends of the organization can come stay for a short term in the house of hospitality. So it is a broader Franciscan community.
That is wonderful. Wow. Actually, I'm learning a lot about this, more than what I listened to. What interested me is the personal kind of witness and you know, your own story too, because I'm wondering, well, how did you get involved? You know, how do people get involved? Because I know I just wanted to say that having been a lay missionary with the Redemptorists, I think that was a major part of why I'm a sister now. It's because of their witness and the service, because something within me was restless. And having been part of a mission team, that really kind of like led me onwards into this journey. And then finally, I didn't have to become a sister, but it did lead me to this vocation. What about you, Liz?
Oh, that's beautiful. I can relate to that. Something restlessness. The image that often comes in my own prayer life is an image of walking into a dark room and looking for the overhead light just wishing I could know what God's call for me is and see it, the light with complete clarity. And I've realized that for me, that overhead light switch doesn't exist, but rather it's a nightlight. And that nightlight, God gives me just enough light for what I need at the moment. And then I have to trust that God will reveal the next nightlight and the next one and the next one. And at the end of my life, this room of shimmering, mismatched, surprising nightlights offers more light and goodness than anything I could have ever imagined had I actually found that overhead light switch that I too often seek. So with that said, my own vocational path is winding. I started living my faith in a more active way, prioritizing justice at Boston College as an undergraduate. Upon graduating from BC, I engaged in postgraduate service myself through Notre Dame's Alliance for Catholic Education, where I served as a fourth grade teacher in Birmingham, Alabama for 2 years. And then after that time, I was discerning, it wasn't that deep at that point in my life, but I knew I wanted to do something for the common good. So I went to work for the federal government for 12 years and really had beautiful experience of learning about servant leadership, had some wonderful, particularly female bosses who lived servant leadership by their witness. 2 of those years I was in Mexico City working in the embassy, and I felt that same restlessness, Sister Lavina, that you spoke to. So by God's grace, I got a leave of absence from the government and volunteered for 3 months in Honduras, teaching in a rural Catholic school in Honduras. And I think that planted the seeds for my serious looking of what am I being called to? What is the tug towards my next career step? A couple of years later, there was a vacancy with the Jesuit Volunteer Corps directing their international program at the time. And I applied, knowing I didn't have the perfect resume for the position, knowing that it might be a leap of faith on both ends. And it was a beautiful leap of faith. I directed the international program at JVC for 3 years and loved it. Around that time, there became an opportunity with FMS, which was in the same building, to become executive director. So I applied. It was a prayerful, discerning process. And I was so honored to be able to join this organization to lead at the next level as executive director, and also to deepen my own faith by embracing and learning about the Franciscan charism. And it really has deepened my relationship with God. I've been here for 6.5 years, and this Franciscan charism has become part of me. It is very special and is part of my path to God now.
I had no idea. So ACE fellowship, when you mentioned ACE, it's like, I just love the fact that all these educators come together, be on mission somewhere else, out of their comfort zone, because community living is not for, for people who like to live complacently or in comfort. I mean, when you marry, you get to know your spouse, and then you have a family, you build your own culture. So that is a very important kind of like vocation being lived out. Being single, whether you're living alone, in terms of your preferences, the way you live, is also one way of being in the church and being of service. And then you have your own community at work, maybe, or intentional community. And then you have a community of people from different families, different backgrounds, maybe different cultures, I don't know.
Yeah.
Probably in a different setting, in a town where it's a different culture. And you must have lived that with ACE, right?
Yes, I absolutely lived it. The school where I was teaching was an nearly all Black school. Adjacent, it was the cathedral school for the city. So adjacent to a parish that had nearly all white parishioners, and literally adjacent. This was a long time ago. This was in 2000 through 2002. And sadly, in 2002, the cathedral school for the city closed. And there were a lot of tensions and a lot of struggles then and now. And it's not limited to Alabama, of course. It's everywhere.
Mm-hmm. But that's also, I think, being out in mission, even locally, as you're saying, it doesn't have to be like, 1,000 miles away in another country. Within our own neighborhoods,
right?
Even our own backyard might as well be 1,000 miles away. In terms of the difference in culture, like the polarities we go through. That's part of being missioned, is being sent out. Yeah. Because at the end of every Mass, we are sent out to go forth and live our lives for the glory of God, in service and following Jesus. I think it's also very interesting that you worked for the Jesuits Mission Service,
Jesuit Volunteer Corps.
JV, volunteer service, so JVC. And you worked for them for 3 years. So, and then you went into FMS, which is
Mhm.
Franciscan. How did you feel about that? And how do you feel about that now? Because FMS, the Franciscan Mission Service, is different. What makes them different?
Yeah, it is different. And I was formed as a young adult in the Ignatian tradition, from my college, university years to making the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius in my 20s to working for JVC. That was a foundation. And Franciscanism has deepened my faith. The idea of standing at the foot of the cross with Jesus and imagining an Ignatian prayer like the Examen through the lens of standing at the foot of the cross with Jesus and marginalized individuals and communities was a concept that was introduced to me through the Franciscans that I know. And that is such a deep prayer practice for me. Another piece of Franciscanism that I love is the incarnation and the reality that God sent his son from a place of love and joy and goodness. I had the opportunity to go with the Franciscan pilgrimage program to Assisi and to Greccio, and that idea and the emphasis on the love and joy and goodness has been so instrumental to me. Of course, salvation is part of our Catholic faith, yes. And that Franciscan emphasis on goodness and love and joy is something that is the starting point for me in my faith. I also love the fraternity, the radical inclusiveness that Franciscanism offers, being able to work with so many women religious who model the witness of welcoming so many to the table so beautifully has been a new experience for me with Franciscan mission service. And of course, the friars do that as well. That fraternity and radical inclusivity of welcoming everybody to the table has been really special.
So tell me more in terms of that ministry of presence. And also, I think you have a story perhaps
Mhm.
on, like how this is impacting young people and their own vocation. Because you talked about your vocation, which I think is beautiful. And so, yeah, please.
Yes, there's so many beautiful stories about the ministry of presence. Let me share one with you briefly. Hannah is a missioner who served in Kingston, Jamaica. One of her ministry sites is a home for boys born HIV positive. There, she met a boy named Peter. Peter lives very simply, has few possessions. On Mother's Day last year, Hannah and her fellow missioner walked with Peter and other boys from the home to the cathedral across the street for Mass, as they did every Sunday. When it was time to bless the mothers at the end of Mass, Hannah leaned over to Peter and asked his mother's name so she could pray for her. Peter was silent for a while before saying, "I don't know. I don't remember." After a pause, Peter said, "I'm going to pray for you. You, Hannah, are like my mother." After Mass each Sunday, Hannah then took Peter and his housemates to another children's home. In this home, the children experienced profound disabilities. Hannah explained to Peter how these children cannot feed themselves, that their brains, arms, and legs don't work the same way as Peter's. Without hesitation, Peter found a hungry child, scooped him up, gave him a big hug, and started bottle feeding him. For over 2 hours, Peter was focused on loving these children. Peter, who experienced being marginalized and oppressed himself, cherished the opportunity to accompany these kids, and they loved him in return. So this is what we are about, being with Jesus by loving and accompanying others. And we see and we witness the awe of Jesus's presence through moments like this. This is the ministry of presence.
That is so well said. And that's such a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing that, Liz.
Oh, thank you.